Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today we're going through all the things that I'm aware of so far that were not in the patch notes, and some of the specifics of things that we did know about that we could only actually see from getting in and playing the game, starting with the opening quests. There are 4 main quests and 1 extra one: saving the mole from Mechanic, which leads to Gunsmith 1 and Introduction, shooting cans from Prapor, which leads to Debut, first in line from Therapist, which leads to Shortage, burning rubber from Skier, which doesn't actually seem to be required for Supplier, and Luxurious Life, because you thought that you were done with Ground Zero, but after completing Debut, you have to come back again to go through to Background Check, which is the new name for checking, i.e. the Bronze Pocket Watch quest. As there are guides out there specifically for both of these quests, as well as the extractions on the map, I'll just leave this as an overview, but it is worth bearing in mind that the Mirror Prospect extract is a flare, just like on Streets, and the Police checkpoint is a car extract, so requires 5k to use. Keeping with the theme of maps, we have the Shoreline rework and small expansion, which is actually really cool. Quite a few things about the location have changed, but the big stuff is that firstly, a car extract has been added to the northeastern point of the map. The Pierboat extract now actually works properly with green flares to signal that it's open, a little bit like old gas on Customs. The whole area between the new car extract and road to Customs has been expanded outwards in a kind of square shape, which is the new cattle farm area. The right hand side of the river has been reworked so you can walk along it properly without getting invisible walled like you used to, although the terminal section looks pretty much the same as it did before. This whole area here is quite different, with much more varying terrain and some pools as well, and the weather station itself can now be gotten up to from many angles, taking away some of its strategical advantage because it can be assaulted from most sides now. The other one is a fallen tree across the river here between power station and gas station, which is a little bit exposed, but it saves you going around either north or south if you think that it's safe. The area around gas is quite different as well, with more rocks, and the terrain as a whole is just much more interesting. Same goes for the bit with the truck scavs and the bush or box scavs higher up. This now looks like it was actually an area that was used, true to BSG map design, and there's a little checkpoint up here too. Most of the north side is mines now as opposed to concrete walls, so just be careful as you walk about because it looks a lot more like Woods does after the update, and there is a co-op extract up here as well through the mines too, but you blow up if you go too far without using it. There's also a new entrance into Resort, which is pretty awesome, and this is on the north side of the east wing just as you come into the compound from the eastern side, and using the fire truck it's possible to vault up and get in here. A small thing but nice to see is the map selection screen is now quite different. The old map was one from Contract Wars that didn't actually match up with the way that we know Tarkov maps can fit together, but they've changed it to be in the same style with the locations where they are supposed to be. So speaking of vaulting a second ago, it seems to work pretty well. The default controls are vault on spacebar continuous and jump on spacebar release, which I thought would clash more, but in most cases it's okay. I've decided to rebind mine now to control and spacebar for vault and just spacebar itself for jump, so that I have more fine control and I don't accidentally jump when I want to vault or climb, because jumping is much louder. You can easily vault over most low fences while sprinting, which feels pretty good on the move, and the climb mechanic lets you get up to intended places way more easily than jumping ever did, as we saw with the east wing entrance. Continuing with mechanics, left shoulder swap is also pretty cool. This does seem to switch the eye of your PMC to the left side, meaning that the left peak is nearly as good as the right. I haven't completely decided on a final keybind for it, but currently I have it set to Control Q, as it feels natural-ish to have it on the left lean with a modifier key. Before we move on, I do want to quickly touch on painkillers. So rather than having the blurry and chromatic aberration that we had last patch, they've actually changed it yet again, and so now you have this ring of desaturation around the outside of the screen. I actually think this looks really cool. So the screen does get blurry if the painkiller effect runs out, but I did test it by stacking a couple of painkillers on the top of each other, and as long as you keep yourself topped up, it seems like you won't get this effect. It's only if you run out of painkillers and you go back to normal without having another one applied. It would be remiss to not talk about recoil at all, although there's not really much hidden about it. Basically, every gun feels very easy to control, and at least for now, the shooting feels amazing. I'm interested to see how this holds up into the mid game and the late game as we can reduce the recoil further, especially when we combine this with the armor hitbox stuff, which is already reducing the time to kill. We're going to have to see how it feels when we get into the late wipe. As for the armor hitboxes themselves, yes, it is finally here. This comprises of built-in components and replaceable plates. Some armors like the Korakulon are all built in, some like the Trooper have 2 built-in sections front and back and 2 plates that you can put in, and others are much more complicated like the Redoute 5 with lots of different hitboxes covered by a variety of soft and hard armor. In almost every case that I have seen so far, the default configuration is Class 2 built-in armor with Class 4 plates, or Class 3 built-in armor with Class 5 or 6 plates, but you can swap and change these around if they fit the form factor of both armors. For example, the plates from the Trooper can be put into the AVS instead, combining the lightness of the base AVS carrier with the lighter plates from the Trooper. To actually buy these plates, you need to be a fairly high level. The light polymer class 4 plates that we've seen are some barter on Peacekeeper 3 worth roughly 50k, so we'll have to see what this actually is, and the much heavier combined materials class 4 plates are 21k each from Skier 3 instead. This is going to take some figuring out to see the best ways to min-max the purchasable plates into various different carriers, so watch this space, but at least the plates themselves seem relatively cheap. One extra thing about replacing plates is that you can do this in Raid, but you can't be wearing the armor. There is a new menu, modding, for dropped armor when you scroll over it, which looks as if it's in its own bag, but this is a mechanism through which you can move plates around without it having to be in a backpack directly. From here, you can just re-equip it also to your PMC with Alt and click. Next, let's talk a little bit about weapons and modding. One of the nicest new features is a railed cover for the AKS-74U series of weapons, meaning that you don't need to use the B18 mount anymore. This is called the Legal Arsenal Pilgrim and is available from Skier 1 for 6k, meaning you can now mount sights normally without having to use a funky and expensive handguard. The other weapon that has been changed a lot is the SKS. This now has a barrel attachment, upper band and gas tube separately, which also gives the possibility of adding a railed gas tube cover at the front. One other cool thing about it is there are now a bunch of different ways to mount optics. Previously, you had to use the SKS dovetail mount with either the Cobra or the Pilad rails, which also meant using the LaRue riser if you wanted to have any ringed optics on there. Now you can simply use the SAG AK rail instead, or alternatively swap the dovetail for a completely new one, the choked scope mount, which can take rings directly, or even swap out the whole dust cover for a Leapers version with a full Picatinny. There's been a couple of changes over on Peacekeeper's shop. You can now get the AUG A1 on Peacekeeper 1, which is kind of cool, although he only sells 10 rounder magazines, meaning that you'll just get 130 in the gun itself and all of your backups are kind of small. This is the same for regular Stanag mags as well. Don't just sell these if you want to use 5.56 super early, as he doesn't sell the 30 rounders for these either, although the 20s are still in stock. We also have the new magazine loading preset, which is pretty neat, but it takes a little bit of fiddling to understand what it's actually doing. Because magazines can be in different sizes, rather than having to make a preset for each one, you have 3 sections: top, loop, and bottom. The way that it functions is whatever you say goes at the bottom gets loaded in first in a certain quantity, then it loops through the central section until there's only room for whatever is specified in the top section, which it loads last. So the priority is like bottom, top, and then loop, because if you don't leave enough space for the loop, then it'll just skip it and load the bottom and the top. As an example to show how this actually functions, this is a silly one, but it demonstrates the point. I've loaded 26 SP at the bottom in the preset, 2 HP and 1 PS in the loop, and a T45M at the top. This preset then loads the 26 SP, 2 HP, 1 PS, which takes the mag to 29, leaving 1 T45 to be loaded at the top. If I set the SP section at the bottom to 30, it loads the entire magazine with SP. With 29, it adds the T45 at the top instead. 28 brings in 1 HP before the loop stops because it doesn't have enough space, and only when we get to 26 do we see the PS cartridge in second place. You need to leave enough space so that it actually can finish the loop, otherwise some of those cartridges just simply won't get loaded at all. You can do other stuff as well, like bring more rounds into the top and bottom sections from the middle bit, as well as select multiple magazines to fill at the same time, so I'll be fiddling with this system and checking out if there are any more cool things to do with it. Outside of all this, there are a ton of ammo changes both on stats and access, but I've dealt with this in a totally separate video, so go and check that out if you haven't already. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.